All right, and now I've started the recording. Let me figure the situation out. All right, everyone, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Again, welcome to our webinar Wednesday on the parole process. I won't say too much about it because I'm gonna let our amazing presenters walk through it, but essentially what we'll be discussing tonight is, starting from the very basics, like what is a parole hearing, how to prepare, what is in a parole packet, exercises that are important for preparing for parole, psychological evaluation, what it is and what you should bring, what happens during a parole hearing, your right to appeal, and then of course Q&A at the end. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to our amazing speakers so that they can introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who they are and their expertise in this topic. So that being said, Lee, I will pass it on to you. And now I have to unmute you again. All right, go ahead, Lee.
Thank you so much, Taina, and thank everybody for showing up. This is it's an important part, and so I'm glad that everybody is taking it serious. My name's Lee Gibson. I'm the Inside Organizing Coordinator with Initiate Justice. I was sentenced to, at 17 years old, I was sentenced to life without parole plus 17 years. I ended up spending 25 years behind bars. And for probably the last 10 years of my time, I was not only a part of the creation of self-help classes, but I was taking them, teaching them, guiding them, life or support groups. So I know how difficult it is and how important it is to be able to prepare for that one day that you're going to be able to get inside that boardroom. And I'm starting to understand the difficulties that families go through during that process too. So I'm really happy to be here with an amazing lineup of Philip and Adrienne. And yeah, I hope that you get as much out of this as you can. And remember, no questions are off the table. Ask anything that you like. So with that, I'll turn it over to Philip.
Thank you. Glad to have your expertise too, man. And so, yeah, my name is Philip Melendez. I spent 20 years in prison. I was convicted of 2 second-degree murders, was found suitable at my initial parole hearing. And like Lee, I took a lot of programs and groups. And after I was found suitable, I know Lee probably went through the same thing where he was asked about how he did it, and had to answer that question probably thousands of times, and probably has answered it thousands of times since after that, even from being home. And yeah, so I gladly am here to share my knowledge and share everything that I did to prepare, and hopefully we can bring some loved ones home, especially in these messed up times where we need folks out of the prison. So glad to be here, and thanks. And Adrienne.
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for joining tonight. For those of you who don't know myself, my name is Adrienne Davis. My husband is currently incarcerated. He was sentenced when he was 19 years old to life without the possibility of parole. Fortunately for us, through his positive programming and my feet on the ground out here and all of our support, we were able to get him commuted to 25 to life. And he did go through the parole hearing process 2 years ago. So I am here to answer any questions that you may have and just help share my knowledge of being on this side, trying to support our loved ones on the inside.
All right, thank you so much, Lee, Phil, and Adrienne, for introducing yourselves. Yeah, I will go ahead and pass it over to you, and the only thing that you need to say to me is next slide. So continue.
Phil, do you want to go or do you want me to take it off?
I don't see any slides, but yeah, I mean, I'd be happy, or you go ahead if you see some slides. Yeah. I don't see the slides.
Yeah, for sure. So the first slide that we're going to talk about is what is a parole hearing, the difference between a youth offender parole hearing and suitability parole hearing. I'll talk a little bit about it, and I'm sure Phil can fill in some of the things that I missed. So a youth offender parole hearing is basically what it says. People from the age of 25 and under that go into a hearing, there are different measures that they kind of weigh during those hearings. And it's specifically the diminished culpability of youth and their ability to, their susceptibility to the reason that they first started doing the behaviors that they were doing that put them in the position to where they even ended up in prison. And so it's really, honestly, I tell people that the youth offender parole hearing and a regular parole hearing is, the preparation is going to be the same. It's going to be the same type of work that you're going to need to put in to be able to get through it. And I know we're going to cover a little bit of that during the parole process and the psych evaluations and things, but they're supposed to have like a lesser degree of harshness in their weighing of the reason why you committed your crime in the first place. And Phil, would you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I would. Yeah, so the youth offender hearings, they're supposed to be, at least somewhat lighter or less harsh, and they're supposed to be based on the hallmarks of youth. And that means diminished culpability in a certain sense that as a youth, your brain is not developed, and the laws that brought that about was SB 261, and that law was based on hallmarks of youth and the prefrontal lobe or prefrontal cortex, some part of your brain not being fully formed until the age of 25. And that's why legislation has changed to include people of age 25 and under to participate in youth offender parole hearings. And those hallmarks of youth are, some of them are inability to escape their circumstances of surroundings or home life, inability to look at long-term consequences, and can't remember the other ones, but there's a few. You can go back and check out like the California legislation website and check out SB 261, passed in 2015, and you can read up on all the hallmarks of youth and what exactly the bill does.
Great. Anything else, or should I move along? Okay.
So how to prepare. This is going to be really important, your behavior. The most important thing is to limit or eliminate the behavior issues that you have inside. So this is for the loved ones in there, trying to limit the amount of 115s, 128s, and lockup orders, the 114s. And the one thing that I always tell people when I was going through these classes and these types of workshops is it's never too late to start. There could be a moment where they slipped up and they got busted with a cell phone, or they got into an altercation, or they got a write up for being out of bounds. And it feels like the weight of the world is on their shoulders, and like, oh, I'm never going to be able to escape this prison. But honestly, it's really just learning from that mistake or learning from that bad choice and moving on. And so there's no behavior that cannot be overcome during the process of being able to show to the board that you're a changed individual and you're no longer a threat to society and you're ready to return. Yeah. Adrienne, Philip, anything on the behavior part?
You said programming. Yeah, you hit all the points. Staying out of trouble for sure. Behavior-wise. So I would say I would add not to limit yourself just to groups and programs, but also to just look into other, like get creative on positive programming. You know, whether it's looking into charitable, shared options or opportunities to be charitable. Like I was going through my file and I saw that I had donated to the Red Cross, and I wasn't even thinking about parole. It was when Hurricane Katrina hit and when the tsunami hit, and I looked back and I was like, oh man, I was just moved, you know. And looking back on it now, when I was preparing for the board, I was like, oh wow, I'm glad I did that, you know. And that was just out the kindness of my heart. And so, like, when you're thinking about programming too, I mean, when you're thinking about your behavior, you know, there's ways to exhibit positive behavior without, and it's not just staying out of trouble, and it's not just about programming.
And if I can add to the programming portion, especially right now, if you have loved ones that are preparing to go to board, it's a lot more difficult to try to navigate getting these classes or any type of self-help under your belt with the COVID happening. So, do know that there are correspondence courses that can be added on to whatever they're doing inside of the prisons as well.
Yeah. And so on this next one, we're going to talk about the what is in a parole packet. And this is how I kind of, these two slides, this is how I structured my personal parole packet when I went through the process. The first part of it, I talked about the relapse prevention plan. Like, what were the things that led me to be the person that I was? And it all comes down to my causative factors and understanding those things that were happening in my life at the time, and the warning signs and basically the triggers that I should have saw coming as a youngster that would have prevented me from actually committing my crime. I'm sorry, my dog's going nuts over here. He's like always wants to steal the show. So yeah, this was my first thing that I actually put in there because I wanted them to understand that I had the insight that was necessary in order for me to be able to explain not only the things that I had done and how I got there, but also that if those warning signs or those triggers have, if they rose in my life at any other point in time, especially while I was in there, and then when I got out here, that I wouldn't respond in the same way that I responded before. And so I had to have a really deep understanding and a knowledge of myself in order to kind of show them that they should take a chance on me and they should allow me to return back to society. Anybody else have anything to add?
Let's see, what is in a parole packet? Social history, support letters, parole plans, education, relapse prevention plan. As far as a parole packet, any kind of writings, and also too, I saw a question about programming without programming, since there's no programming right now. Somebody mentioned prep, definitely a good thing. Also two book reports, which is also something that was in my parole packet. I read so many books, and well, not so many books, I read a few books, especially on addictive thinking, and did book reports on them, and make sure that I put those in my packet. And the other things that I don't see on the list is I wrote like a whole epiphany process, right? I basically went crazy on the writings. That's one of the things that I always advise for people is to just go crazy on the writing. Write whatever. And if it's not going in the packet, it's going into your brain and it's going into your memory bank, and you can talk about it if need be. And so, yeah, I wrote my whole epiphany process. I wrote about what, like simple moments, superficial moments where I thought about some change and what needs to happen, more impactful moments, and then moments that I felt like were the ones that were just, that drove everything home and set me on the positive path to where I would never relapse to, past behaviors.
And then one thing I also want to add to, in addition to what is outlined here, is for those of you who have loved ones that have any type of mental health history within prison or even prior to, that's something that they can address within their parole packet as well. For example, my husband is in the EOP program at the facility that he's located at. And he did a little bit of writing about the type of therapy that he's been receiving and what has helped and what hasn't. So that's also helpful for the board to see, the progress in his mental health as well.
Indeed. And then also too, Lee, forgive me if I'm forgetting about the slides, but are all these things going to be broken down, like the social history, support letters, and parole plans going to be broken down individually in different slides?
Yeah, no, this right here, we are going to have a few of them that we unpack a little bit more and flesh out. But this right here was basically our guide. And so as we go through this, there's another slide that has probably about 7 other cue cards of what's in a parole packet. And then we'll go into like the psych evaluation and stuff like that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, just looking at the list, so I'm glad we're going to get some more, but this is definitely the good bones to get a good foundation. All of these things are I don't want to say the bare minimum, but a good standard to aspire to. And then once you get there, like I said, go crazy on the writing, because that's going to be super helpful one way or another.
Yeah, and I would also add too that everybody's parole packet is going to be kind of different. It's going to be unique, and it should be unique. It should be special to them, because we've all walked in different shoes and we've all had different experiences that we had to overcome, that we've gone through, traumas that we've gone through. So these are big parts. Like Philip was talking about about addiction issues, and some people don't have addiction issues, so they don't really need to cover the AANA, but some people have gang issues where they need to start covering about acceptance, and they need to cover about why they originally kind of gravitated towards that type of subset or of people. And so it's really individualized, and it's something that your loved one, as they go through their social history, and I have an exercise in there that Monica will drop into the chat box on the experience summary / life story. And it's really what it is about. It covers why, how, and when you became the person that you were, and the person that you are now. And it gives just a nice little framework of how somebody can kind of start to write that, because when you think of a life story, people oftentimes want to write this whole memoir about every little thing that's happened in their life, but you really want to start focusing it in on your causative factors and how those causative factors came about your life, and then how that right there manifested itself into a way of thinking, a belief system that they may have had, and into the behaviors that they were exhibiting. Support letters, those are like super important. That it shows that other people kind of will vouch for you and kind of stand up and say, you know what, they've changed. I knew Lee when he was 15, 16 years old, and I know Lee now when he's 40 something, and he's not the same person. And this is kind of the pathway that he's gone through and how he's changed his life. And not only that, am I willing to vouch for him, that I'm also willing to offer him a place to stay or offer him a job if there's any type of specific things that he needs to learn about, financial literacy or being able to transition into college or any of these things. This is where your support letters will really start to kind of show that other people are willing to take a chance on you too, and so should the board. The next thing that I want to talk to, and Philip and Adrienne, you can jump in at any time, is what will you do when you get released? These are your parole plans. And I know Philip's really big on goals, and he has on his parole plans, he had it mapped out from day 1 to day 2 to week 1 to month 1. And these are organic. These are things that are going to continuously happen as your loved one is creating their parole plans. They're going to kind of change. They're going to be flexible. They're going to add things to them. They're going to take things away, and really start to spell out exactly to the board members that you've thought about what are the difficulties that are going to arise, the issues that are going to arise, how you're going to be able to overcome them, and also about the good things that you want to do too, spending time with your family, visiting loved ones, going to barbecues. All of those types of things are important in the family integration, in the reintegration back into society, that shows the board that this person right here in front of them has really thought about these issues. And so the parole plans are like the latter part of the hearing, and we're going to talk about exactly the order of the hearing later on in the slides, and kind of what they can expect from moment by moment as they enter into that. Can you go ahead and switch the slide, Taina? This is what Philip and Adrienne were talking about earlier, is the writings, insight papers, book reports, testimonies, letters to the youth, things that you have learned. In book reports, if you could go ahead and, Monica, put in the slide, the link to the book reports. These aren't the traditional book reports that you wrote when you was a kid about this is the author and this is what it is. The book reports should be specific to you, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have like a whole summary of the book. You pick something out of it, a lesson that you had learned. If it's Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and you talk about finding purpose within oneself, and this is how you overcome difficulties, that type of thing, and how that right there is going to be utilized in your life moving forward, or you already use it in your life. Lessons that are learned in those books, and how they kind of you're able to then take that lesson and apply it to every day of your life. Do you have, I know Philip has a lot to add to this, because book reports this goes a lot to talk about how institutions don't have a lot of programming, or during the COVID-19, and finding unique ways to be able show that you've not only changed who you were, but to be able to develop insight and an understanding of who you are as a person and why you won't reoffend.
Yeah, as far as book reports, I've been, doing my parole show, and people have been offering up a bunch of different resources. And I recently came upon like a nice big list from, I think his name was Steve Carrillo, from one of my guests that I had on. She had him on her show, and we've been sharing information and resources. And there's this list that it talks about, did you have gangs? Did you have addiction? Did you have gun violence? And they have like books for each section. So definitely hit me up for that. If you have Facebook, hit me up on Facebook. I make it open for people to message me on Messenger, and I have the resource readily available. I drop them into the Messenger, and you can have those books, especially like you said, when there's no programming due to COVID. And just one thing, you covered a lot of ground on book reports for sure. The only thing I would say is that there are some similarities in the way that I did my book reports, and also everyone can do their book reports differently. As long as you said, like what you said, you're dealing with your own specific issues. And so for me, the one thing that I would say is that in similarity to traditional book reports, I actually use quotes. And I did that because I wanted to make sure the board saw that, hey, I read this. And then I flipped from these pages to these pages. And, I don't know if they look that deep, but, sometimes they're really nitpicky. And so that's one of the tactics that I employed, is to like, hey, but I mean, these are things that actually resonated with me too. And I did actually read the book, just for my own personal growth, but just looking at different sections of the book to make sure that I hit like beginning, middle, and end. I don't know if that makes sense or if I'm just being paranoid, but when it comes to your freedom, I think covering all bases is super important.
Absolutely. And, just to add on to what Philip had said, when your loved one is working on these book reports, tell them they need to get out of that comfort zone. This is going to be a very uncomfortable process for them. It's going to bring up a lot of old trauma that they might not have already processed. And talking about those uncomfortable topics will help them grow, and the board recognizes that. For example, my husband did his book report on a book called Bodies Under Siege, and it's specifically to people who self-harm. And that was something that he hid not only from me, but from his family for a very long time. So being able to touch on those very vulnerable topics, in addition to, the personal growth as well, is huge. And the board really looks highly upon that, being able to be vulnerable in front of them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so the writings are going to be important, and they can find many different avenues in order to kind of explore those issues. The next thing that I would talk about is remorse letters. These right here are going to be more than likely one of the most important things that they actually go through, because it's going to be able to offer them an opportunity to not only make direct amends, but also to be able to kind of take their responsibility and show that they empathize and that they understand the harm that they've actually created. And we'll talk about other people that are factually innocent of their crimes, that didn't do them. And I can answer a few questions. I've had a lot of experience of helping people prepare that were factually innocent for their crimes. But the remorse letters, I think I gave Monica a kind of like an outline on how to kind of start, because they're difficult. And like Adrienne said, and I know Philip will talk about a little bit too, is it's tough. It's tough being vulnerable, and it's tough talking about the things that are worst shames in our life, and trying to do it for the first time in front of a board that is really weighing your life in their hands. You freeze up, and a lot of people just, it's new, and they become emotionally distraught, or they're not able to articulate how they truly feel inside. So I've written more remorse letters than I could possibly count. And it was all the way, not only from the survivors or the victims of my crimes, but to my family members, my community members, people that I had harmed throughout my life. And I really just started to kind of unpack it and think about it, and making sure that I was representing like who I was and how I felt about the things that I had done. Either one of you have something to add to that?
Yeah, no, I just definitely want to echo the fact that it's deeply painful. I, as I mentioned, I went crazy on my writings, wrote everything but that. Like I wrote that at the end, and you know, I shared my story a lot in groups, and you know, it used to break me down all the time, and I knew what it was going to feel like to write those letters. And so, just for the folks that are supporting their loved ones, I would say, you know, as you said too, get out of that comfort zone, push, but don't push too hard. You know, try to find that middle ground, because that's it's some painful stuff, and it's trauma. I mean, even though, you know, yes, we're guilty, and yes, we're also, for those that are factually guilty, like there's that to reckon with. But at the same time, we also need to know that for us, you know, dealing with that, it is we traumatize ourselves, and yes, it's our fault, but we traumatize ourselves, and we need to be cognizant of that when we're going to the board, when we're preparing for the board, and when we're helping our loved ones prepare.
Next slide.
Yes, you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
So, I talked about this already a little bit, how to write a life story and experience summary, the main experiences throughout your life that identify your causative factors and traumatic events. I know Monica dropped the link in there earlier, and that right there is, for me personally, I had mine whittled down to 1 page, typed page, and it was, I knew my life so well. I just wanted to hit on the main points about the abuse that I had gone through, the abuse and the trauma that I actually had survived, and then the trauma that I then inflicted on others. And I even talked about the crime and the responsibility within a paragraph. But they're really just, for me personally, it was really just a chance for me to put it into a nice, clear, concise, and succinct page where I know the board they don't read everything. They just don't have the time. But like Philip said, you never know what's going to resonate with them. They may have read the same book that you've read. And if you're not able to really talk about that, then they're going to call you on it. I know a guy had gone in there and he talked about that he read the Bible every day. And they said, "Oh yeah, what was the verse that you read this morning?" Well, he was being honest and he was being truthful, and he was able to go ahead and articulate that verse and talk about it and what it kind of meant to him that morning, and how it was impactful and significant. And so I would, I know we haven't really talked on that a lot, but honesty is the big thing. You never want to get caught in a lie, and you never want to try to make things seem more than they were, or less, or trying to lessen your culpability. Because if they catch you into a lie, then all of the credibility that you've put into that bank goes into bankruptcy. And that's the one thing that you don't really want to happen with them, saying that you have a credibility issues, because if they think that you're lying, what else are you lying about? And so you really have to be honest about the things that you have done, the things that you have gone through, and your intentions moving forward. The grid exercise is a tool that Philip has come up with to assist in structuring how you became the person that you were and are now. Do you have that link, Monica, that you could drop in and kind of let people see? And if Philip, if you could just go over it just really briefly and show the framework of how that right there is a really useful tool for people to kind of put these areas that they're going to need to talk to in a nice little box to where one flows right into the next.
Yep. I have the grid right here. I swear I have, I don't know, I got life stories, I got parole plans. It has just become my life. So here's the grid. I know there's a link to it, but the first thing is the event or trauma, right? And people also call those causative factors. And then there's feelings. I know you probably can't see the boxes, but there's a link. You'll be able to do it. And so just let me say a little bit about it. And so then there's the stories that you told yourself about the event. Then there's the character defects developed. And then there's the behaviors and the crimes that were committed because of it. And so one example that I always talk about is my dad denying paternity of me and being a negative influence on me. And, how did I feel about that? I felt sad. I felt lonely. Stories that I told myself was that I'm unlovable, that I'm worthless, and I need to find a way to be loved and accepted. And the character defects that I developed were selfish, being self-centered, and I forget, I was just going over character defects, and I have a whole list of those. So folks that don't have my Facebook, it's just my name. You search my name, it should pop up. Send me that message, and I'll get you like the causative, not the causative factors, the character defects, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I've been developing. Like I said, it's all here. It's all available. Just send me the message, and I'll get you PDFs and whatnot. But yeah, this particular grid. After the character defects that I developed, the last section is the crimes and the behaviors committed. Right? I joined a gang. I got into fights. I used drugs. I used alcohol. I used women. And these are the things that I was doing to fulfill those needs, to stop feeling sad and lonely, to feel lovable, and to feel that I had worth. And so it's this little grid, and it has 1, 2, 3 boxes on my little page. But when I initially did it, they said list about 7, right? And I had stuff with my mom, I had stuff with my step family, and just traumatic family issues. And when I went through it in the group, we whittled them down to like 2 main ones. And so you can use those to help write your life story though, and just really connect the dots and start from the beginning, from your earliest traumas, and watch how they build and watch how they show. They tell a story on how you show up in the world and where things started to change for you, where things started to shift. And it was like, for me, we used to quiz each other, and we used to encourage each other. When I was at San Quentin, they'd be like, stay on the grid, just stay on that path and stay on the grid. And so I definitely recommend that tool, just exploring traumas and really helping develop that life story, that understanding of self and how you showed up in the world and why. And that's one of the main things, one of the main points to insight that the parole board wants to see.
Yeah, for sure. The last thing on the slide right here that I kind of want to just briefly touch on is the letter of apology. This is the direct amends part, or the kind of understanding that you have about the impact of your choices. And so I know I personally wrote letters of apology to all of the people that were not only involved in my crime, but even my co-defendants. I wrote them to my family. I wrote them to the community members. I wrote them to the fire department, to the medical people that actually showed up. Like, I wrote apology letters to everybody that I knew that I had harmed. And I knew that I probably wasn't going to be able to send them out or give them to anyone. They don't have the Office of Victim Services anymore, where you can kind of send these into Sacramento. And if the survivors of your crime want to reach out and obtain them, I don't think that they've opened up that service anymore. I think it was defunded. And then I also explored another way on how to kind of really understand how somebody would feel going through that. I used to write these letters, and I used to encourage other people to write them from the victim's shoes or from the survivor's shoes, and wrote the letter to myself from their perspective of what they felt, what they were going through, what their day was like, how they experienced it. And it really gave me a true understanding of the potential ramifications and the ripple effect of my actions. And so that right there was one of the things that the board members pointed out while I was going through the process. They hadn't seen, those particular board members hadn't seen that way of doing it before, and they commented on it and they talked about it. But like Philip said, it really just gave me an opportunity to be able to be vulnerable and to explore my feelings that I had, the remorse and the regret and the deep shame that I had about the things that I had done to people, innocent people that didn't have that type of behavior coming. And so when it did come time for me to kind of talk about it to the board, it showed up, and it showed that I had gone through it, and I had thought about it, and I'd shared with other people those feelings too. And so that's important, because speaking of books, Brene Brown, she says that, the only way for shame to live is in the darkness. And so we have to expose it. And so bringing that out and being able to talk about that is super important for an individual that's about to go through this process.
Yeah, I would say I did pretty much the same thing, letters to everybody, first responders, the larger community. Yeah, and also too, there's some things about that where I explored that in different writings, where I would write about, more abstract, even like how I influence, crime rates and murder rates and influence other people. So like the reaches, like people talk about the ripple effects, and they are infinite. I don't know about the butterfly effect. I never seen that movie, but I kind of get the concept, and it makes sense in that regard. As far as the letters of apology, though, yeah, I wrote them. I didn't write them to myself as the person who I had murdered, but what I did was I wrote apology letters to my younger self too, and those, like, man, those are painful. Like you really think about how far you came, and from the good kid that you were born as, and you really start looking at how far you went, and it's pretty sad. But as you said, tapping into that emotion and tapping into the real feelings behind it, that's what's needed. It's not just needed to bring these things out to light, but it's also needed to really address the reality of the situations that we've caused. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways or not a bunch of different ways, but a bunch of different apology letters that I think are very powerful and necessary.
Thank you, Phil.
Next slide, please. What loved ones can do to prepare for the parole process. I love it when Adrienne lights up right here, because she's going through it and she understands it, and she knows that the other side, and these were things that I had learned when I had gotten out, what the other side had kind of goes through, and the emotional turmoil and pain that it kind of takes on them. And there's a lot that they feel like is riding on their shoulders. So Adrienne, can you talk a little bit about your slide and how it kind of manifests in your life, and give us some knowledge?
All right, thank you. I'm going to try to get through this without getting emotional as well. But these are just some bullet points that I put together just to help us on the other side of the fence, navigate what we're going through and what we're feeling as we're sharing this experience with you. And so just a few key points that I wanted to share with everyone are up here on the slide. So the first thing that I learned very quickly was to give yourself plenty of time. Fortunately, like I had mentioned, my husband was commuted, but that meant that he was a youth offender and also had a lot of credits that made his parole hearing within 3 months of him being commuted. So we literally threw a parole packet together within 3 months. And that wanted to be my first point that I talked about, was just make sure you give yourself plenty of time. There's so much to do to prepare for this important moment in your loved one's life. So if you're able to, if you have the ability, I would say at least start 9 months just to kind of get an idea of what you want to do moving forward with, breaking everything down to 6 months, and no less than 3, I would say, because we were scrambling. And, I'll kind of go through my bullet points and it'll make a little bit more sense of why I say to give yourself plenty of time. Through the whole process, communication is key. To keep those lines of communication open, a lot of times, especially for someone who has been incarcerated for an extreme amount of time, the communication is often difficult. A lot of the feelings and everything surrounding that crime that led them to prison has been suppressed most of the time. And so a lot of these emotions are going to come up, and just being there for them and listening and, being the shoulder, because it's definitely a team effort. If you have someone that's out here helping you, it's great. I couldn't imagine having to navigate this on your own on the other side of the fence. And just being open and honest and supportive through the whole process. You may or may not learn things about your loved one that you might have not known up to that point. And I can say, speaking from my experience, that was the case. There was, things that my husband felt shame for, things that he didn't quite know how to explain. And it's definitely, it's an eye-opening experience to go through that. So just, I know a lot of people in this realm, we tend to not judge others just because of our, you know, where we stand in the fight, you know, as advocacy to end mass incarceration, to abolish prisons altogether. And it's definitely something that it's a difficult experience to navigate. So just be prepared to feel a lot of things that you might not have felt before with your loved one and sharing their trauma. If you have the ability to, I know that the board does appoint them a state appointed lawyer, but if you do have the ability to find a lawyer and research that, most of the times it's part of the lawyer's fee that they will go in and coach your loved one through the parole process and help them to be more open to communicate on the level that the board is looking for. And in addition to that, finding the support for you here on the outside as well. It's heavy being in this situation, and as you are the support system for your loved one, you in turn need that support system as well. So reaching out to fellow advocates, you know, friends, family, possibly people that have already been through this process, and just, you know, sharing what you're going through and not carrying that around with you all the time. Gathering resources, and what that means would be anywhere from support letters to calling re-entry houses to getting NA or AA information in your area, marriage counseling, looking for people that would be willing to hire your loved one once they come home. So, you know, gathering resources, it's a broad topic, but those are just a few examples. And if you are able to, if time permits, attending parole seminars. I know that Fair Chance Project does these every 3 to 6 months, and they hold almost like a training session to help you prepare and information that you can send in to your loved one. And they also do a mock hearing with, they bring in attorneys, and they have former Board of Parole commissioners who also sometimes are at these meetings. So that's helpful to speak to someone who actually sat on the board and, you know, initially had some of our loved ones' lives within their hands. And expect the unexpected. Example of that is 2 weeks before my husband went to parole board, he found out that he had some information in his C file. So trying to navigate that a few weeks out from the parole board was stressful, to say the least. And as Phil and Lee hit on, you want them to be honest with their whole process, things that they might think that might be about, but you don't want to give them too much information that they might already know. So it's a very fine line that your loved one has to navigate. And just remember, you cannot do this for them. And coming from myself, I'm an Aries, so I don't like it when I feel like I'm not in control of something. And this process is very subjective. And I felt like my role, like I had no way to control it. Like this panel of men and women had my husband's life in their hands. And so just knowing that, you know, we can be the support system for them, but they're going to be the ones that ultimately have to go through it. And we can do what we can on our end, but we can't do this whole thing for them. And so just being able to be that support system. And lastly, just staying positive. Like I said, it's a very heavy experience, but, you know, so many people have had positive outcomes from this, and just remembering that if they get denied, they'll always have another chance.
Adrienne, could you repeat the name of the organization that does the parole seminars?
I was referring to Fair Chance Project, which is headed by Jerry Silva. And if you follow them on Facebook, I know that they do post when they will have those seminars, and they're anywhere from 3 to 6 months. They offer those. So yes.
Thank you, Adrienne.
Psychological evaluations, the comprehensive risk assessment. So this right here is really your mini board. This is the board before the board. This is what they're going to kind of take and unpack themselves and really have their sticking points for it. And the psychological evaluation is super important, and they're going to cover quite a few things from the very beginning of your life all the way until where you are and what you plan on doing, just like a board hearing. And these are just a couple of the 4 of the main things: the psychosocial development, your life growing up as an adult. Don't add to it and don't take away. That's what I said before. Just be honest. This right here is by a trained psychiatrist, or at least a psychologist, that they are using. So they're using some structures and some mechanisms to kind of weigh whether or not you're a danger to society that are really archaic, and they shouldn't actually even be using them. But this is the system that we're kind of in. And so they're not always fair. And sometimes they can become frustrating. But I will say this, like going into my psych eval, I was completely ready because I'd already, like Adrienne said, to put all of these things together beforehand. She said 6 months. I was literally preparing for my hearing 5 years before I even had a life sentence, before they even took the life without parole from me. And so like every day that I was doing it, because I was preparing so many other people, that I was just accumulating all of these different things that would eventually go into my parole packet. So as you go into the psychological evaluation, it's going to be you and just a doctor, and they're going to sit you down and they're going to ask you how you're feeling. They're going to start looking at your grooming, how you're presenting yourself, if you're fidgeting, if you're nervous. They really start to weigh out every bit about you. And it's important because they put this in their reports, and the board is going to read this. And so going in there prepared, I know I went in there with my parole packet, and a lot of people say that their psych evaluator would not take their parole packet. So knowing that procedure, what I did is I went in there with just insight papers and my parole plans, and I submitted those to them. And I kept it down to a bare minimum, because my parole packet ended up being, voluminous. So I just took those few things that I knew were super important, that if I didn't cover it during our conversation, I wanted them to be able to refer back to it later on. And sure enough, their whole psych evaluation was literally quoting the things that I had written and that I had given them, that I had given the lady when I had gone in. And so, yeah, another thing that they're going to cover is the criminal history. This was my first ever conviction. This was my first ever crime that I was, that I had that I had gotten convicted of. But I talked about the things that I was doing leading up to it, about the stealing that I was doing, the smoking weed, and breaking into houses. Like, I told them stuff that they didn't know, because I was building that trust, and that I was building, what I always like to say is, I was putting truth into the bank. I wasn't there to be retried for other cases. There was no statute of limitation. The statute of limitations was over. I wasn't going to re-damage myself in that moment. And it was really, I'd come to a point in my life where I wanted to make sure that I was owning up to everything that I had done in my life, and making sure that I didn't have to remember a lie if I didn't lie. And so that was my kind of point as I was going in. Just go ahead and own up to it, and let them know that I was a changed individual, and I just didn't wake up one day and become somebody that was capable of taking somebody's life. There was a lot of events that led up to that point. The clinical assessment, like I talked about, was the appearance and the eyesight. Final thing, that big comprehensive risk assessment, low, moderate, or high. I personally have never witnessed anybody that was getting out on a high, but I have on lows and moderates. And what that is it's a mechanism that they use to measure whether or not you're still a threat to society. And they base that on your understanding of your causative factors and the things that you have done since then to rectify the behaviors and the beliefs that you had when you actually committed your crime or when you were that type of person. Philip or Adrienne, do you have, I know Philip has something to add to this. This right here, it's a beast. It really is. The psychological evaluations are very important, and they can become overwhelming at times because you literally go in there and you meet the person for the first time, and now all of a sudden you're spilling out your whole life and everything that you've ever done wrong and your hopes and your dreams.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that you said. You covered a lot of ground. I would only add the fact that they have it around 90 days before your actual hearing. And so having your packet, having your insight, having all your preparations ready before that is actually important. You know, people ask, well, the board's coming up, you know, I should be ready at least a month or two before. No. How about maybe like Lee, well, 5 years ahead? That's ideal. But in an imperfect world where, you know, your LWOP gets dropped or, you know, something happens like in Adrienne's case, you do what you can, but be prepared for that psych hearing at least, I mean, have everything ready for the actual board at least a month before at the very least, a month before the psych hearing. And it truly is, I can't stress the fact enough that it is a mini parole board. When I went to the board, I noticed that they had my psych evaluation in front of them the whole time. And they relied so heavily on that. And it was like basically just rereading what was in it and asking me again. And it goes through the same cycle as the actual parole hearing as far as the points of childhood development, the crime itself, and the in-prison behavior, and the parole plan. So it really is 100% a mini parole board hearing. And as far as the clinical assessment, I would add too, they were actually looking at my rate of speech, my actual eye contact, and was it appropriate or was it inappropriate, which is crazy, but I mean, that's what a psychologist would do, I guess. And then I agree 100%, well, not 100%, I would agree 99% about putting that trust in the bank, because so one of the things that I noticed about the psych hearing is, you know, in their measurement, one of the things that they do is measure how much criminal activity, when does it start, and how many developmental stages does it cross over, like from, you know, 12 to 15, from 16 to 18, and from 19 to the age of 25. And it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the prefrontal cortex and the mental development. And so if these negative behaviors are crossing so many developmental stages, then you're likely to get a higher score, or they're gonna assess the fact that, or they're gonna assess you in a way that would say that you are, it's harder to rid yourself of this criminality because it's been going on for so long, across these many stages, and your fight to change that lifestyle is gonna be harder than other people's. And so when it comes to giving them those crimes and putting that truth in the bank, I did talk about stuff that I definitely did not get convicted for, that stuff that I got away with, but I did try to maintain some things that, like, okay, this is enough. And you know, I do agree with honesty being the best policy, but at the same time, not everything needs to be out there. And if you do omit some things, just make sure I know, and I know how it is. I know what Lee means when it's easier to not remember, or it's easier to not lie and then not have to remember the lie. And same goes with omissions, but it's a slippery slope. But you know, in getting that low score, which I did, which was crazy, especially because I felt like I gave them too much, and also I felt like I gave them too much of the board again. But I gave them just enough, I guess, to not get that moderate score. So just be mindful of what is being said and how it's going to be analyzed. And then there's also, I think there was a question about what measurements they use. I think it was a PCL-R scoring, and I'm not even sure what that means, but I remember seeing that on my psych evaluation. So for the psychologists and for those that want to look that up, maybe you can Google it and see what that really means. But yeah, that's all I would have to add about the psych evaluation.
If I can share, my husband's psych evaluation, like I had mentioned, he does have a history of mental health prior to going into prison, and has continued to struggle with his mental health while incarcerated. And once again, speaking from my experience and my husband's experience, the psychological evaluations are very subjective. You get evaluated by a psychologist who is just meeting your loved one. They don't really have any background besides what they're getting from their C-file and from, if they do have a doctor within the facility, the doctor's notes. And in my husband's case, he has been diagnosed with different mental health disabilities and disorders. And his psychological evaluation came in as moderate, and they even diagnosed him with a new disorder within the psychological evaluation. So as I mentioned, someone who is just meeting your loved one, who spends a few hours with them, in essence, it's very subjective. So just be aware of what is contained in those psychological evaluations may also not, in your eyes, line up with who your loved one is to you. So just be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, I had just a couple more thoughts about the parole board. One thing to note is that they are part of the board of parole hearings.
Yes.
I looked at my psych hearing, and it was Board of Parole Hearings Psychological Evaluation Department. So keep note of that. And one thing that I've heard is that you can hire your own evaluator.
Yep.
Whether that'll be helpful or not, that's, whether they get a conflicting score or different opinion, that's something to weigh for yourself. And then the other thing that I thought of was some of the main personality disorders that we were talking about a minute ago before we started, and that is antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy or sociopathy, and narcissism. And those are three of the main diagnoses that we get as we prepare for the board. So definitely study up on those and look at where the character defects that we bring out in the grid and how those apply to those, and try to look at the connection and how you can take groups programming, read books and book reports, and do writings to combat those particular findings.
Yeah, and the last thing that I would add onto that is the psychological evaluation will also give you an assessment of where you are, of what the board is going to be looking at and the things probably that they're going to focus in on, because they're going to be the flags that are going to be raised by the psych evaluator. So as those come in, it's going to give you a lot of information back of what they're going to kind of focus in on and what their concerns are. So that gives you another opportunity to be able to create those writings or those insight papers about how the psych evaluator is wrong, or you acknowledge their flags that they're raising, and then you're able to combat them from that point on as you actually go into the hearing. And yeah, if we can go to the next slide, Taina. Hearing preparation, we've already talked about this. Begin immediately. Put as many positive things into your packet and your C-file as you can, because guarantee they're accumulating all of the negative stuff. One other thing that I wanted to say about the psych evaluator, yes, when they do go through their medical, if they are triple CMS or anything like that, that person or the psych evaluator, they're going to know what's in your medical file, and so is the board. So those things are not confidential, and so they're going to actually be able to have access to it.
Yep, HIPAA
so
does not apply.
Yeah, so absolutely put as many things forward right now. I don't care if, me personally, I don't care if their hearing is 10 years from now. We never know what's going to happen. We never know who's going to get commuted. And Initiate Justice, I'll give us a plug real quick. We're going to end extreme sentencing, and we're going to make sure that they make that stuff retroactive, and we're going to get people out quicker than what they think. And so these types of things, you never know when your time is going to come. Like I said, I had life without all the way up until that moment of December 20th of 2017. And I went to board shortly after that and was found suitable in my first hearing. And it was because of the preparation that I knew that I was putting in, not only as an individual, as a person of who I wanted to show up as in life, but I knew that if I was ever given an opportunity and a chance, I wanted to swing from the fence. I wasn't going to take anything for granted. I have too much love for life and too much love for the continuance of my family and coming out here. And so that's really how I kind of lived my everyday process, that I knew I wasn't going to get involved in anything that was going to kind of derail that. Mock and moot hearings. These are role play practices of a hearing. Just like if you've ever had a conversation with yourself before you actually had the conversation with your loved one, it's the same thing. We're having conversations with the board before we actually have that conversation with the board. And it's really helpful to do that with your friends or in a class setting around people. Get as uncomfortable as you possibly can, because I guarantee you, once that time comes in that board, you're going to be uncomfortable. You got 3 people staring at you or 2 people, and maybe the victim's next of kin is showing up, the DA's there. Everybody's going to be kind of scrutinizing you, and it becomes overwhelming. You start to get those triggers, those flashbacks of being in the courtroom, of being judged, and am I good enough? All of those insecurities start to come back into play, and it's important for you to try to be able to get rid of those as much as possible, and also just to get comfortable with the process. We're going to talk about the process in a second, but we used to literally take people's transcripts and we would dissect them, and we knew exactly which board member, what their pet peeves were, whether it was parenting, domestic violence, insight, remorse. We knew exactly what it was that those commissioners were looking for within their own hearings. And we knew which panels were actually coming into our institutions. I'm probably giving up too information, but we knew which panels were coming into our institution, and we knew how to kind of prepare our fellow peers. And we would sit out there in the cold, we would sit out in the day rooms, we would sit out there on the yard, we would form circles, whatever it was, and we would read through the transcripts. We would start them off just like they start off a transcript, making sure that they could read, they could write, and just to set the tone for the moment. And I can't underscore how important that process was for the people that we were actually sending in there to those hearings. And I would be hard pressed to give you more than 5 people out of a 3-year process that was involved in these moot hearings and these classes with me that were found not suitable going into those hearings. And we had dozens and dozens of people going into these hearings, and they were going in there and they were swinging for the fences and they were hitting home runs too. And it was because of the preparation that we were putting in, and these moot hearings are a really big part of that.
Yeah, definitely. You got my heart beating fast. Talking about the inside of the hearing, that is traumatizing for sure. Go, like you said, go over the transcript, set it up, look at the structure, and really start off with state your name, spell your name, what's your CDC number, like really get into that. Do it as many times as you can, and that really did help. I always, when I talk about it on my show, I talk about feeling like an out-of-body experience, just the scrutiny. I didn't have the survivors or the next of kin in my hearing, but I knew what was on the line, and that puts so much pressure. I was crying before my hearing, listening to a song about some girl talking about "Don't Let Me Down." It was like some like EDM song, and it just had me weeping. It's like, damn, I have so much on the line. I have family to come home to. I can't let her down, and so like, it puts you in such an out-of-body state. It took me like at least an hour to come back to like normal-ish. And I was still racked with nerves, but those mock hearings really helped me understand, like you said, Lee, the phases. And so I knew where I was at in this, and I know what I had to talk about. I've talked about it thousands of times. However, these nerves are going crazy. And when I talk about this, or when I try to help people prepare for that specific thing, I also talk about public speaking and the fear of it, because people have, even without having their life on the line, people have, like, in my, a communications class or a speech class, they said in one of the books that we have a higher fear of public speaking than death, like on average. Like, and I was like, wow, it was eye-opening. And so one thing that I always encourage, I know there's no programs right now, but when programs do open back up, if you're sitting in a room of 30 or 40 or 20 or 30 people in a group, in a program, and it's time for you to share, do it. Like, don't shy away, jump into that fire, get in there, talk about it, painful and shameful as it is, it helps. Like every bit of public speaking that you get helps, and jump into it. Like volunteer. I know it's uncomfortable and it's scary, but there's so much on the line, and doing all of these unorthodox things that challenge yourself are super important. Let me see. Oh, and the other thing about mock or moot hearings that I heard that was on a lighter note was the one of my guests that I had last week on my show. She talked about doing mock hearings in the family visiting, and I was like, I'd be kind of upset. I wouldn't want to do that, but you know, it's something that you can do, and it's just another opportunity. And you can do it on the phone. You can like people would question me in the chat line, like say like they release my building, and then another folks from that's preparing for the board comes in, and the chat hall comes behind us, and they're like, oh hey, what's up, man? What's your what's step one? Hey, you know, they'll just like challenge you, and just having those pop-up questions too. Like that's how other people can support people. You know, even if it's not a mock hearing or a moot hearing, it's just like off guard. What's this? What's the trigger? You know, how do you? What's your internal trigger, external triggers? You know, tell me one. It's what you got to do. It's painful. It's scary. It's challenging. But I mean, at the end of the day, Lee, you know, it's definitely worth it.
Yeah.
And just one more point off of what Phil just said. My husband and I, when we got married almost 7 years ago, we had 5 people at our wedding in the visiting room, and he did not want to say his vows out loud in front of 5 people. So fast forward to 2017, where he did the first TEDx event over in RJ Donovan prison. So he went from not wanting to talk in front of 5 people at our wedding to talking in front of 250 people and being recorded, and is now all over YouTube. So you definitely, you know, have to do things that are out of your comfort zone to get you comfortable. Like Phil said, talking in front of whoever you need to talk in front of to get you home.
Study, study, study. That's really what it comes down to is preparation. Because when that preparation hits the pavement and you're in front of them, like Philip said it, and I know Adrienne and everybody else that's tuning in, they know how much they want their family members home. They know how much that they really want this. And it really takes some work. You know, it was 5 seconds of a stupid choice that I made that cost me 25 years of my life. And I hurt countless of other people by my actions. And so I wanted to make sure that I was the best person that I could possibly be moving forward from the time that I had committed my crime, and helping or assisting as many other people too. And so studying, that's what we would do. We would study all the time, read the transcripts, ask questions of those who have experienced the parole hearings. This is right out of Philip's teaching right here. Pick the brains of those that have been found suitable for parole, as well as those that were denied. And that's a key point right there. You don't only want to focus in on the successes, you want to focus on the things that people were actually denied for, because that's going to give you a little bit more insight of them being able to play Monday morning quarterback, to be able to second guess the things that they had said and where they wish that they would have said something different. And it gives you some more understanding. And it's not about parroting what somebody else said. It's just about getting a deeper understanding of the way of thinking, of really internalizing those lessons as well. Read and understand the antisocial personality disorder. Philip talked about that earlier. That's the #1 label that they're going to give almost anybody that is in there. They have antisocial personality ideation. It doesn't even need to be the disorder that you actually have. It's just you've had thoughts of an antisocial personality person. And so those things right there are the things that they focus in on. They need more than just that one thing to be able to deny you. But after that one thing, after they are able to kind of label that one thing, it's easy to pick something else where they say you don't have adequate parole plans, or you didn't express your remorse well enough, or something like that. You're not taking full responsibility. So it's important to learn these things, because these are the things that they're judging them on. Learn your causative factors, really learn them, that led to the crime. Philip and Adrienne have talked about this. Read books on how to address them and do book reports. Be honest with yourself. Write and learn your life story. I can't reiterate how often we would hold these moot hearings, and I would ask somebody to tell me about the significant factors in your life or the significant things in your life, and they would go on a 20 to 30 minute tangent, and I would let them talk because I want to make sure that they're getting comfortable in talking about them. But then when we would unpack it and we would debrief, I'd listen, you're taking way too long. They're going to interrupt you. And so as we would continue to go through these mock hearings, that's what I would do. I would be the antagonist, and I would like interrupt. I would mess with them. I would like take them down a rabbit hole. And Philip said this earlier, don't let them take you off your grid. Don't let them take you off your square. Stick with your causative factors, stick with your responsibilities, stick with your insight, stick with your responsibility, and stick with who you are now as opposed to the person that you were before. Philip, Adrienne, you have anything else to add on the study?
Yeah, just about your life story. I'm looking at one from my friend. He's home now. He works with us, and he offered his up, and it's 2 pages, and I think mine was about a page and a half, and it's not about how many dogs you had. I mean, I do have that on one of my questions as far as like how to write your life story. What kind of pets did you have? Getting familiar with that. But when it comes to the life story, you got to get to the meat. You don't want to, like you said, go off on a 20-minute rant. They actually get frustrated. They do these hearings. They want to go home to their families. They want to maybe go eat, get a coffee. And that's sad to say that these factors influence in anybody's life, a decision on somebody's life. But we're dealing with human beings, and human beings are flawed. So that brings up another point that I always was taught, was to be concise, answer what they want, and don't give extras, because that's when you can go into uncharted territory. And when you're in uncharted territory, you're not liable to remember what you just said. And if it comes back again, your bank will become bankrupt again. That your credibility will be shot. And sometimes people just talk to just be talking, and that's not okay. So definitely learn it, write it, and rewrite it many times. And then also too, in writing it multiple times, you'll uncover some things that you might have missed, and have a deeper reflection or epiphany about one certain thing that you didn't have as deep as one before. So just going back to it and revising it. Like Lee said, he did his 5 years prior. I'm sure he rewrote his life story I don't know how many times, and how many other realizations came from all those separate writings. As far as the only other thing I would say, you covered everything pretty spot on, even antisocial personality disorder. But one thing that I always point out when I talk about that is that it's not being quiet or keeping to yourself. People think that, they said I'm antisocial, but I be talking to folks, and I'm a personable guy, and that's not what it is. And it's more about being anti-society, right? That's basically what it is. So it's against society and societal norms, and people that live in society and have disregard for them and their possessions, their life, their livelihood, and putting yourself above them. So yeah, definitely know that about antisocial personality disorder, and study up on that the most, because it is, like you said, even the ideations, that is the most common one. Even when I was preparing, and my board coaches, they'd be like, you got to study this one. Like he got it straight out of the DSM-5, and he's like, read this, and we're going to talk about this next class. And I did, and he's like, and when he started the class, he was like, you going to get this, watch. And I was like, what? Okay, maybe, we'll see. I'm going to go to the psych board, and I'll do my thing and see what happens. And sure enough, popped up, and he's like, told you, everybody gets it. And I don't want to put that blanket statement out to everyone. Somebody might get the ideation, or maybe somebody might not even get it. I don't know how, based on the meeting, but also too, we know how the parole board works and who they are, so and who the psychs work for. So it's very likely that you will get it.
Yeah. And one thing, Adrienne, before you, please, about the life story and how Philip was talking about the grid, we used another format to be able to keep it clear and concise. We used events, feelings, beliefs, and reactions, or events, feelings, and reactions. An event happened in my life. I felt a certain way about it, and I reacted in a certain way. And so what it does is it shows a pattern of things happening, how they felt or how they interpreted it, the beliefs that was built from it, and then how they reacted to it, and how it went into the next event, the next feeling and reaction, the next event, next feeling and reaction. So that right there was able to keep the life stories clear and concise, and be able to kind of jump from frame to frame. I'm sorry, Adrienne, go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. And I don't know if we had hit on this at all as far as the reading the transcripts and reading people's who have been approved or denied. And if your loved one has already gone to board, get copies of the previous board hearings, because you definitely want to remain consistent with what was said in previous hearings, because they will look for that pattern. It will also help your loved one to remember, you know, certain key points that they might not remember right off the bat, because their crime may have happened well over 10, 15, 20 years ago. So just refreshing themselves on what had transpired, because sometimes there's a bit of time between the hearings, 2 years, 5 years, 7 years. So, you know, it's a little brush up for them as well on what was said in previous hearings.
Yeah, next slide, Tina. And you can get those transcripts for free of any of your loved ones. Anybody that's gone through the board, you can get them digitally for free. All you have to do is go onto the CDCR website, and there's a section in there about hearings and ordering past transcripts. You just need their name and their number and when they had gone to the board. What goes on in a hearing? Yeah, it looks intimidating. It is intimidating. Can we go to the next slide too, Taina? And your circle is still on the slide screen where you marked on it before?
I did not do that. I don't know what that is.
Oh. Okay, learn the stages of the board hearing. This is it. When you go in, they're going to talk about first they're going to, you know, make sure that you're well and of able mind to have the hearing and swear you in and that type of thing. Then they're going to talk about pre-conviction, the crime itself, post-conviction, parole plans. The DA is going to do their questioning. The closings are going to happen, deliberations, and then the decision. And so this is the order that they normally follow to a T. And they'll even tell them at the very beginning of the hearing, like, this is what we're going to do. And they usually follow it pretty religiously. Pre-conviction, that's your life story. That's everything that led up to the crime itself. And then so having an understanding of those causative factors is really important right there. Being able to unpack and talk about not only the traumas that you had gone through, but the traumas that you then inflicted on anyone else. The crime itself, I know that we said that we were going to talk about people that were factually innocent versus the people that were guilty of the crimes. They're going to want you to unpack that completely. That's the heart of the hearing right there, of you having insight on what you had done, understanding the impact and the ripple effect of what you had done, taking responsibility, not minimizing. You'll catch that type of term a lot. People will say, oh, they said that I was minimizing. And there's very subtle things that you can say that will draw that conclusion if they want to, of you minimizing. People that are factually innocent, I've gone through several of these types of moot hearings and mock hearings and helping people through this process. And every one of them that I know of have been found suitable. And most of them were the very first time of going in there claiming factual innocence because of the preparation that they put in. They didn't need to take responsibility for the crime itself, but responsibility for the person that they were and the lifestyle that they were living at the time, and how they could get caught up into that type of accusation or blame, or a feasible reason and solution of why they were actually the one that was convicted of that crime. And so everybody's crimes, I mean, everybody's cases are different. The factors coming in are different. So it's really hard to give blanket advice or blanket statements about somebody's individual process or their life stories or their crimes, because there's a lot of different nuances throughout each one. Then they're going to talk about the post-conviction, what you've done since then, what are the classes that you've taken. This is where the writings come in, the behavioral stuff, the programming, all of those little buzzwords that they love to use. They want to make sure that usually within the last 5 years that you're absolutely disciplinary free. And then talking about the things that you've done inside, whether it's bad or good, positive or negative behaviors, why you've done them. If you've gotten your education, what does that mean to you? if you've committed a 115 or you were involved in a battery, why did you do it and what did you learn from it are the things that you really need to think about. Then they're going to go into your parole plans about, you know, if they do take a chance on you, what are you going to do when you get out? Do you have plans? Do you have a place to stay? Do you have ideas on how hard it is to get a job? Are you going to continue your education? Do you have a resume? These types of things are giving them a little bit more comfort that you've thought about the difficulties and the issues that are going to arise once you return back to society. Then the DA is going to do their questioning. The DAs very rarely are for anyone to get out. My DA personally threw a 15-year denial suggestion at me, and I had gone through my incarceration, and this is probably going to be a surprise probably to Philip, but I went through my whole incarceration with 115, and that was for a refusal to report to work. I had a spotless record. It wasn't that I was a spotless individual in there. I was doing things that I shouldn't have done. I just didn't get caught for him. And when he talked earlier about being honest about everything, I was honest about most of it. And the other parts didn't come up. And so I didn't need to face it, and I didn't need to kind of own up to it. But the DA is definitely going to be adversarial. They're going to go in, they're going to want to try to trick you up. They're going to want to try to minimize your accomplishments and maximize the effect that you'd had on the people that you had hurt, and you being, like he labeled those things earlier, antisocial personality disorders or narcissistic or whatever it is. They are really going to hone in on those and try to make sure that they get a denial. And I don't understand why they're even there, because that's literally their line of interrogation, and their intention is to try to get you a denial. Then there's going to come the closings of the DA is going to get a chance to close. Your attorney is going to get a chance to close and say some words about you. And you personally are going to get a chance to be able to give a statement. I always tell people, listen, let your attorneys argue all the positive things that you have done and how you have changed. You personally take that as an opportunity to apologize to the people that you had hurt in your life. Make it that right there, your remorse. People have different strategies. That was always my strategy. Let your attorney argue the good things about you, because that eliminates the narcissistic part. And then you go ahead and talk about how you understand the impact of your actions. Deliberations are the longest wait of your life. And because you literally years in being behind bars are weighed on that brief moment that they're in there discussing everything. A trick that I had learned throughout my thing, I leave when I went into my hearing, I took 2 different packets. I took one of all of my certificates and accomplishments, and I took my parole plan. I left them in there. They tried to tell me to take them. I said, no, go ahead, leave them in here. I'm going to go in there. And sure enough, they flipped through them. I knew that they flipped through them because some of the pages were adjusted and one of them was left open. So I wanted to leave that as a lasting statement that not only the person that I was, but also they had the artifacts right in front of them to be able to kind of examine at their own leisure. And then the decision comes and they go through it, and you're either going to be found suitable or not suitable. And it can be the most euphoric and out-of-body experience that you're ever going to have, or it can be one of the most depressing and hurtful, because you're not only letting yourself down, but you feel like you're letting your family and your loved ones down. And it's a tough moment, but they're watching you at that time too, to see how you're going to respond, how you're going to react. And then that right there is a chance for you to not only show humility and understanding, but it's also a chance for you to be able to learn from those decisions and to be able to come back in there at your advancement and to knock it out of the park the second time. So those are the stages of the board hearing. Philip and Adrienne, do you have anything to add to any of that?
Yeah, I just work my way back up. I have different like points. Like for one, that was definitely a beautiful graphic, and also just beautiful explanation. You hit on all the points and talked on so much. And a lot of what I'm going to say is just personal stuff. Pre-conviction, that is that's just your childhood basically, and that's all that insight that you got. And I know you mentioned that, so I'll move on to the crime itself. And when you talked about minimizing, also too, it's the time for you to, like, so I used to write, I wrote and rewrote again, like I always say, revise is the crime impact statement. And so those are actual, part of that entails writing the actual details of the crime, the day of, the events leading up to it. And so I did that many times. And when I took it to the board as part of my writings, I made sure that the first statement that I said at the very top was that I write this statement to to answer to all the lies that I told at my hearing. And so one thing that people are told, I was 19 when I committed my crime. I think it was about 20 when I went to my trial. Still a young buck, young lad, and definitely influenced by the lawyer. There goes that circle again. Awesome. And so he's like, you know what? We got to get you out of this. And obviously, as a young kid, I wanted to come home. Nobody wants to go to prison for life. Nobody wants to get the death penalty or LWOP or whatever they're facing. Life sentences, that didn't mean you come home. That means you die in prison anyway, at least back when I was convicted. And so my lawyer and I concocted a story, and it was terrible. And, years later, looking at the impact of my crime and having real accountability and remorse and accepting responsibility and being, showing accountable actions every chance I get and just living up to it and walking that walk, I came to detest my trial and the way that I acted in it. And so that was one of the most important statements that I made on top of that crime impact statement, was to say that, I'm taking full responsibility, and I did not minimize. I said, this is what happened that day. This is how I felt, and I went and I did this, that, and the other X, Y, A through Z. I did all of that. And when it comes to the board, I know we talked about openness and not minimizing certain things. That's something that I never held back on that at all. Post conviction, I see that's write-ups. So you mentioned addressing all those write-ups, and that's even 128. I would say do writing. I did writings on 128, like I did like insight writings on even a 128. Parole plans, covered that spot on. The only thing that I thought of was, you mentioned my 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 3 month, 5 year, 10-year plan. I had all of those, and I still have them now. But the other part that goes into that is also like a relapse prevention plan, and that's knowing the crime itself, and if there's addiction involved, how to combat that as well. And so having those relapse prevention plans for both is something that I had on there. DA questioning, yeah, you covered that really well. They're adversarial. They rarely say like, yeah, let them out. Closing, I had pretty much the same strategy. I took that opportunity to apologize, and I told to them in the room, to the people that I've harmed, and that I will accept any judgment that you have, just based on the fact that I'm just here, and I submit humbly to the decision and will respect it. Deliberations, I left it. They didn't even tell me to take it. They just, I think they might have asked me to say, hey, let me check that out, and they definitely went through all of that stuff. So pack that with whatever you got. If it's like you said, Adrienne, TEDx. I hosted one too at San Quentin, and I had newspaper clippings in there. Like look at all this crazy weird stuff I be doing. I'm not that dude anymore. Anything that shows that, have that in there, because they will pick through that. And then the deliberations, longest 15 minutes of my life. Decision was definitely out of body. I remember sobbing. They read the whole the decision, and then they read the factors that went into it, whether it's a youth offender or just whatever it was based on. And I don't remember. I had to go back and read the transcript later, and I cried again when I read the transcripts. But like just sitting there, like just having that weight, just feel like years of incarceration and years of fear of dying in there, and it's like, man, this shit is over. I forget my language, but like that's the thought that I remember having while these emotions were pouring out. And yeah, and then I don't know what the next slide is, but then that euphoria goes away pretty quick when you realize you gotta wait for the governor's decision. I'm sorry, Adrienne, did you have anything for that before we go to, I see we're on the next slide, but did you want to add anything?
No, I think you guys did a great job. I have nothing. I got nothing.
Okay.
I will add for her, the families and the loved ones go through these hearings too. Like you're
Yeah.
going through these process, and somebody that has realized that and understands it, on behalf of your loved ones, I would like to first point out, like, thank you for sticking with them, and thank you for sticking with us, and believing in us, because, you know, I know people have probably overquoted Brian Stevenson about we're better than the worst choices that we have ever made, and we are. And for you to see that in us, and to believe in us, like, that gives every one of those people in there that you are supporting that hope and that confidence that that they have things to live for, they have things to care for, and they have people that mean a more than what their words or that hearing, that decision is ever going to mean. And so it's important for the support out here. And so thank you on behalf of all the people in there and the people that you guys are supporting. Right to appeal and or the petition to advance. Everybody has, if you don't agree with the decision, by law, that they have a chance to be able to appeal it. They don't allow you to do it, I think, for the first 30 or 60 days until they actually produce the transcripts and it's actually reviewed by the governor's review board. And so everyone's going to be able to get that thing for the 1045A, the petition to advance. I will say this, if you're in that position and you're waiting to be able to put your best foot forward again, make sure that you've addressed those things that they had concerns about, whether you believed them or you agreed with them or not. Really examine what the reasons why they said that they denied you, and look at it from a lens of a lens of, like, their lens, a clarity, and say, okay, listen, they said that I didn't understand my parenting life or something like that. Let me take a parenting class. They said that I didn't have full insight into the impact of my crimes. Let me do some exercises that show the ripple effect of what I've done. Whatever it is, kind of take it to heart, because the things that they raise, the flags that they raise, you need to address and put those in your 1045A, your petition to advance, as proof that things have changed. So if they have these reasons A, B, and C of why they denied you, make sure that you answer to A, B, and C when you put in your petition to advance. So I've done these. I've been able to get my parole plans. They're tighter or whatever the case may be. So it's the difference between waiting 18 months for your hearing again, or the waiting of 3 years for your hearing again. So that's a significant amount of time. Anything that you would add to that, Philip?
This is uncharted territory for me. Fortunately, I'm not trying to brag, both. I have heard about the appeals, 1045s, addressing the issues. Yeah, if you can't find a class that has that, and that's also a problem. Like if they say you lack insight, well, that's already problematic in itself. But it's hard to find classes that just pop up. You know, if you get that 3-year denial and you're eligible in 18 months, some of those waiting lists are, years long. So I would say find books.
I don't know if y'all are just frozen for me.
You're frozen. We're not.
I'm good, right? Is that?
Yeah, you're good.
Stanley?
Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's all I had for the denials or the right to appeals.
And to add on to that, we may be going the route of the 1045A petition to advance. Some of the things they pointed out in my husband's were they wanted him to get his GED, but yet he has a high school diploma and is in college courses. So there was an error in his decision. And so he wants to get his one last class, which would give him his AA degree. And so he wants to have that before he goes back to the board. And so just building off of what Lee had mentioned, whatever they had addressed that they want you, because they will let you know if they do deny you, they will give you specifics on what they want to see the next time you come to the board. So I can give more insight on this in a year from now. We still got some time.
Okay, so I think Taina's back, but we're now at the last slide, and the last slide was the closings, the questions, and the answers. Taina, are you back with us?
Yes, I don't know what happened, but I can go.
It was just the last slide that showed the freedom, which we're hoping that everybody actually gets to experience, your loved ones get to experience. And so, yeah, like literally, I know there were some questions in the boxes that we didn't really be able to answer. I personally wasn't paying attention to the chat because I was wanting to give my full attention here. But if you have questions, please put them in the chat, raise your hand, do something to kind of get the attention, and let's unpack this a little bit more with the amount of time that we got left, because I think this is really important.
And I'm just going back through the chat to see if I can point out any questions.
Yeah, I see a new one. Oh, go ahead.
I have one. Do we have a template on how to start a support letter? And I know that out of all the letters that we've written for within our organizations or for our loved ones, we definitely have templates. I'm not sure if Taina has something that she can share, or Monica, if you have something you can drop into the chat box, a link for support letters. But if you email one of us, I'm sure we could get you one for sure.
Yeah, and just to just name a few things, Lee touched on it earlier too, just as far as like what your relationship to that person was, how long you've known them, you know, if you've known them, you know, before the crime, and you know, if you're childhood friends. And I'm just kind of picking off of what my wife wrote for me, and she wrote about all that. She wrote about the change that she saw. She wrote about my plans and the support that she had for me. And so like that varies too. And so I did see a question about like who should write letters, how many letters, or maybe that was just I'm used to that question. But some people say like have 100 letters. I don't think that's that. I don't think that's you know, too few letters. I always suggest have the right amount of letters, and have the letters that have pertinent information that can back up your parole plans. Like if you have part of your parole plans or your relapse prevention plan is to say, I have a support network that I can lean on, and if I have you know, a moment of trigger or relapse, I have life coaches, and these coaches are readily available for me. And I had letters from those life coaches that detailed that particular support that they had for me. Same thing with people that might have transportation for you. And so there's like I'm sure there are templates, but as far as having, you know, the background, what you've seen then, what you know now, and listening what type of support you have for that person, I think those are some really basic, rudimentary things that would go into the support letter.
And to build off of what Phil had said, my husband, in addition to the mental health issues, there are addiction issues there. So we actually went a step to do like an NA sponsor agreement with people that are currently going through the program of NA and AA that were willing to vouch for my husband and be part of his support group. And then we also did something called an accountability agreement. You know, it's kind of the limits of your imagination of what you feel, what you and your loved one feel like they should include in their packet. I mean, nothing is off limits. The more support, the better. But I have examples of those. If I put my email in the chat box, if anybody wants copies of different things, like a sample of a relapse prevention plan, a sample of like transitional plan goals, you know, your first 60 days out, what that looks like. I have those available to share. If anybody's interested, they could email me.
Yeah, I would also to add, and it's just good advice throughout the whole hearing, throughout the whole process, and just try to consider the parole board and their decision, and think about whether or not at the end of the hearing, after the end of all your writings, would they want to be your neighbor? Would they feel comfortable with you being their neighbor? And that includes support letters. What kind of support is going to keep this person from coming to my house and robbing and stealing for addiction, or just to commit violence because they haven't addressed their issues. So yeah, any letters, any writings that they do on the inside, keep that in mind.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions coming in, and I see them, and I know that we probably won't be able to get to all of them. So hopefully we'll be able to copy these down, Taina, and if I can take some time tomorrow to kind of to answer some different ones that may not arise. So one of the questions, and I'm sorry if we don't get to your question, we really want to, is about the lifers. What if they're not comfortable speaking in public speaking settings? Practice. Listen, that's what it really comes down to. I don't care if they're talking to their cellie or the person that lives next door to them, or if they're talking into small groups. This is why small groups or group classes are so important to the board, is because they want you to be able to own up to your stuff in a group, and they know that us in there, if we hear bull crap, we're going to call bull crap. If we hear something that doesn't sound right, we're going to say that doesn't make sense. That doesn't sound right. And so it's important that they do this in a group setting and let those inhibitions down. Like Adrienne said, that, you know, he didn't even want to say his vowels, but now he's doing a TED Talk. And so it really is that. It's just practice, and being able to talk about it. And you don't need to be, you know, this super educated person that has gotten their master's or bachelor's or college degrees or whatever. Talk how you talk like you're talking to, if it was your loved one and they were asking these questions. If this is the way that it makes you comfortable in speaking, as long as you're showing your insight and you're taking your responsibility, those things are what are important. It isn't a matter of the big fancy words that you use or saying words that you don't even understand, because they may ask you to break down one of those words when they'll go, I don't understand what that means. What does that mean? And they're just testing you to see if you're actually being honest and if you're the genuine person that they want to see there. Another question that somebody had was, is there a limit on the amount of papers that are allowed to be submitted or taken into the hearing? Yeah, there is actually a limit of, I think, additional papers. Like your parole packet can be whatever it is, the one that's submitted beforehand that your attorney submit. But I think it's 15 pieces of new papers that you're allowed to take into your hearing to submit to the board for them to put on record. And that's another strategy that a lot of people use. They'll make sure that they withhold a couple of their employment opportunities or really powerful support letters that they will then, or their apology letters that they will then take in at the very end, because they're going to read them onto record. It's literally going to go on there. It isn't just a matter of, oh, they had a bunch of things that they've submitted. They're going to actually have that on record for them. I knew that we were going to get specific case questions, and those are a little harder to answer because they're individualized. But somebody asked, how does one parole out of state, or how would that process be? There is a process, and me personally, you're going to have to probably talk to the attorney. I've known people that have done it, but I've also known people that have paroled out here, gone through the transitional housing, and then got their transfer out of state because that paperwork is done. That paperwork can be found online. It's not that hard to find it. All you have to do is talk about transferring parole, like Google it. I want to transfer my parole to out of state, and there's forms that you can file with their parole agent. Any suggestions for someone facing possible deportation in their parole plan? Yeah, talk about it. Philip, do you have something that you would add on to that? Because I know people currently that are in ICE stations and people that have gotten out or that are waiting deportation, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, just the only thing that I've seen is folks, you know, being threatened to be taken, actually have been taken to, like, the Philippines, Cambodia, Mexico. And what they do, insight for that is, I would say just do the same thing that we've been doing, study the same way that we've been doing. But when it comes to the parole plans, that's the only real difference that I've seen. And what they did was have a parole plan for, you know, a county or two in California, and also in the country that they might be deported to, because they want to make sure that you have plans for that as well. And that's the only major difference that I've seen. I didn't have to worry about that. So I can't really speak too much to it, but that's just something that I've seen from the folks that were facing deportation.
Yeah, thank you. Is it necessary, this is from Raylene, is it necessary to send a copy of the parole packet to the parole board prior to the hearing? If so, how soon before the hearing? Is there a specific address that you can provide? Your attorney is supposed to do this for you. And I think it's 30 days, maybe even 60 days before your hearing. I think it's 60 days. I'm not sure, don't quote me on that, but get it in. as soon as possible, like within 60 days. There is an address in Sacramento. Your attorney knows about it. The counselors know about it in their buildings. All they have to do is get the specific address. I don't have it anymore. I had attorneys kind of take care of that process. Do you have anything there, Philip?
Yeah, I don't know the specific time. And if for some reason you run into roadblocks from counselors who are sometimes inept, definitely look on the CDCR website, the Board of Parole Hearings tab, and they should have all the information on when and where to send the packet.
Another good question from Nisa is, how do you get support when the loved one dropped their whole past? And I think there was another question here about they continue to get a denial because of gang involvement, because they didn't want to tell on their friends. So here's the thing. How do you get support when the loved one has dropped their whole past? So all of the support that they had before is no longer existing in their life. Honestly, that's a good thing, in my opinion. And I don't mean that their relationships weren't able to become healthy. What I mean is those factors that were present in their life when they actually were that person are no longer present in their life. And so this is a good thing. So the support that you would now get is with the community-based organizations, whether it's with Initiate Justice, and I'll give us another plug, or it's other resources that are available out there about getting involved in civic engagement and community involvement. PrEP has some things that they can get involved in. Gogi has some things that they can get involved in here. There's a lot of volunteer efforts. If they plan on going to college, there's Project Rebound. There's a lot of organizations out here that are willing to take a chance and step up and be able to offer these. Another thing is the transitional housing. The transitional housings that they're going to go to, they're going to offer all of these resources and these services. The parole agent has to offer these resources too. They have what they call PAC meetings, where they'll go to this meeting and there will be booths of community-based organizations that are offering things on how to connect them to public assistance, how to connect them to housing, how to connect them to job opportunities, how to connect them to vocations. So there's a lot of support that's available out there. They just have to be willing and ready to talk about it, because support comes in many, many different forms. Is there anything that either one of you would add to that?
Yeah, no, you touched on everything. And in the beginning, you said that might be a good thing. And then also too, when it comes to that, maybe put that in part of the writings. Thank you for that question. Hashtag. I know that person personally. Yeah, make that part of the writings, like as part of telling your story, hey, I have lost contact throughout my journey. I've lost contact in people, and I've noticed and I've learned that these relationships, not that, like you said, they might have been okay, but they might at some point, but I've made the realization that these were not healthy choices. They're not healthy people, even though they might be family, and that alone presents its own level of insight. So yeah, I like everything you said about the other resources that are available. Definitely explore those.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if I could just add something onto that, a few of the transitional homes and different type of resources that we had tried to reach out to, a lot of them encourage our loved ones to correspond with them, a year or 6 months out, so they can kind of get to know who it is that they're supporting through this process, and sharing their stories and have a little back and forth, so they have a better understanding of what your loved one may need as well. So anytime that they get some sort of mail or correspondence, encourage them to write to Initiate Justice, encourage them to write to Restore Justice, and reach out to those resources, because that's what ultimately we're here to do, is help your loved ones come home.
Yeah, thank you. And Laura, you ask a really important question, and there's really no simple answer to this. And what you're asking is, what if the sole reason for the denial is gang status, and one is not willing to turn on his friends and going on 40 years now on a second-degree murder where they're serving 15 to life? This is one of the reasons why we're trying to get rid of extreme sentencing. This shouldn't be a factor that somebody would have to kind of roll over, turn state's evidence, or tell on the people that were involved. They're not there to retry the case. Why are we here to litigate the case also? But they're going to hold on to this point right here, and that is that they still are attached to a criminal mindset and a criminal ideology. And that right there is a risk factor for them that they're not willing to budge on. So that's a very difficult question to answer, and it would take probably a little more exploration of the exact factors of the crime. And it's a question that needs to be posed to the to the attorney. And maybe they've gotten to a point to where they're not just going to talk about the crime, because that's your right in the hearing, is not to talk about the crime. You can talk about everything leading up to the crime, and then you can talk about everything after the crime. And so maybe that is a strategy that they would work out with their attorney, is just not to talk about the crime at all. And that's not supposed to be a sole reason for them to deny you for your suitability. So there's no easy answer. I'm not going to sit here and try to give you one, or say you can say this or say that, because it's not. There was a person that I knew that was factually innocent. He is now free out here. And they asked him during his hearing, the hearing before I had actually met him, doesn't he go and tell on the other people that he knows that are doing dirt on the yard? And he said that would be committing political suicide. And that is the same type of thing. It's that mentality and that criminal mindset. And so it's hard. And there's no easy answer to that. Philip, is there anything a suggestion that you would give her?
Yeah, no, so I like what you said about having more case factors of the crime itself, but also to the relationship factors with the people that he refuses to turn on. So that's definitely, exploring those might help you come up with a solution, whether they might be family members or childhood friends, and exploring those factors and how they pertain to him not wanting to do this. But also too, what you spoke on the actual gang and putting in work on the yard too, that's a whole nother story. And, there's no one answer that says, yes, this is what you say, and this is, you're good to go, you'll come home. But one thing that I have heard, I had a guest on my show that he mentioned, not debriefing and staying on a GP yard and being still labeled as an active gang member, even though he had left the actual gang activity. He hadn't put in work in a long time. He'd been clean, he'd been doing good. What he said is that when they asked him, like, well, if you're so different from these guys, how come you haven't left this yard? And one of the things that he said that was really, 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 it hit me. It was like, he said, I'm trying to help them. If I leave them, who's going to help them? And so I'm trying to be an example for them and lead them out of it in the same way that I have. And so that was really poignant. And I think in regards to gang life within the prison, that's one thing. And then the separate thing about telling people on your case, there's a lot to explore. Definitely explore the relationship aspect of it as well.
Yeah, and maybe one of the things that had come to mind when he was talking about it is, because I know a lot of people have been validated, or they have those types of connections. And that's a really good point that his friend had made. And I would also say that, that's their hearing, and they're not there to expose other people. That's for them to take responsibility for their actions, and they're in there to take responsibility for their own and who they are as a person. And talking or gossiping about somebody else is not why they're there. So yeah, again, that one's a tough one. I see that we have, and I'm sorry I couldn't give you a better answer or a solution to your problem, but it definitely is something that needs to be kind of gone over. Do you see any other questions that
there's a lot.
It's 8:28, so yeah, and I know, and this has been a really great conversation. Y'all have offered so much detailed information. I definitely feel like I learned a lot. Adrienne, I wanted to ask if there was anything that you wanted to add before I close this out.
Put me on the spot. Like I said before, the whole process, it's very subjective. You could have your loved one go into the hearing, having a recent write-up and, not doing the best and falling short and still get granted parole. Or you could have someone who's never had a write-up ever, and they're going to question it because, as Lee said, his whole time in, he had one write-up. And it's not that, we were flying straight the whole time. It's just, we were good at not getting caught. And, you have to realize and just keep that in the back of your mind that it is very subjective, and there's a good possibility that it could go either way. Sometimes, with the conversations I've had with people who sat on the board and were commissioners, they've told me it is subjective. Sometimes they go in, they already know what their decision is going to be before your loved one even says a word. And some of them are split, and they're like, well, we'll see what they say when they get in here. So, just like I said, being supportive of your loved one, being supportive of yourself, making sure that everyone has the resources and support that they need during this time. You know, and my email is always open. I might not answer right away, but I've been through it. I'm not going to say that I'm an expert. I have no legal background at all, but I'm always willing to help somebody else because I remember how difficult this journey has been and has continued to be. And that's what we're here for, is just to support each other. So I encourage any, you know, no question is stupid. No question is, you know, too big or too small. If I don't have the answer, I'll point you direction in somebody who would have it.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, Phil, and Lee. You know, I just want to say that I know that it takes a lot of courage and strength to share your personal stories. I really appreciate the vulnerability and the courage that you all have shown. So thank you so much for drawing from your personal experiences and, you know, sharing, you know, the knowledge that you have with all of us. You know, folks are getting free because of the work that you all do and because of the information that you share. So thank you so much for being part of this webinar, being part of this movement and this work. Thank you, Phil, for joining us from Restore Justice, you know, who's a great partner organization. Initiate Justice works with them on a lot of different projects. Adrienne, who is in our first cohort of the Institute of Impacted Leaders, and, you know, Lee, okay, don't do that. Don't do that. And Lee, who is, of course, on staff and is our Inside Organizing Coordinator. Just want to quickly say this is the last webinar that we're going to be doing, most likely for a while. Our new cohorts of the Institute of Impacted Leaders are going to be launching in a couple of weeks. So we're taking a break from the webinar so that we can focus our attention on that. But if we do have more time and capacity, it's something that we would love to pick back up. So in the meantime, please, you know, check out the webinars that we currently have on our website. This one will also be posted to the website shortly. And, you know, feel free to reach out to any of us with questions. In particular, if you have any questions that didn't get answered, please feel free to email Lee, just lee@initiatejustice.org. I'm sure Phil and Adrienne would also be open, but I'm not going to volunteer them because they're not staff. So I'll leave that decision up to them.
It's totally fine. Totally fine. I would actually also to have them check out my Facebook. I receive all kinds of messages on Messenger. I have resources that people can request through Messenger. So just search me, friend me, or not friend me. Just, you know, hit me on Messenger, and I'll send you whatever I can and answer any questions I can.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope that you have a great night. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Night. Thank you.
Bye.